Jane, Jerry, and I have been hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail all day. We were pooped, and we're not having any luck finding a suitable campsite. It was starting to get dark, and we couldn't find any level space that was large enough that would hold our 3 tents. Frustrated and exhausted, we ended up setting up camp in a definitely less than optimal setting that breaks a lot of the rules of setting up a perfect camp. The site we eventually chose, we're surrounded by dead trees, probably from a lightning storm. And this is a definite no-no because branches or even the tree could fall on you. We were also less than a mile from a road, which breaks one of my personal rules. I figure I'm pretty safe amongst other hikers, but I don't want to be around somebody if they're able to bring a case of beer and who knows what could go on. So I try to stay preferably 2 miles, but certainly not closer than a mile to a road whenever possible. Like I said, I don't worry about my fellow hikers so much. I've never met anyone on the trails that I'd be uncomfortable around. It's some unknown, possibly intoxicated local that I worry about. So what should we have done? I've put together the following 10-point checklist that will optimize your chance of having a great campsite. The more of these you get right, the better your campsite. So let's get started. When I'm backpacking, I generally start looking for a campsite somewhere around 4 o'clock. But if you're super tired and the terrain and the water situation is not optimal, you may want to start looking a little bit earlier. That was probably what the problem was on the example that I gave to start this show. And also, if you're tired, you may want to hide your pack and make note of where you put it because you're going to be tired and you don't want to forget where you hid it, so you can scout ahead without carrying all that extra weight. This way, you're going to be more likely to seek out a good campsite instead of settling for the first adequate one, which is what we did. So what exactly does a good campsite look like? Number 1, check before you even head out. What are the regulations for the area that you're planning to camp? The national parks, national forests, the BLM lands, and the state parks, they all have different rules and restrictions. Obviously, you want to honor the rules as they're trying to keep things nice for all of us. And if you need a reservation, make one. If you need a permit, get one. You certainly don't want to get a ticket from a ranger or be forced to move because you didn't pay attention to the guidelines. And while you're at it, find out what the current campfire rules are. So once you've figured out what you're allowed to do, then the next most important thing on a campsite is your water. A great campsite has a solid source of quality water nearby, so you don't have to haul it too far. You can learn about water treatment options on the Adventure Travel Show podcast episode number 3. I'll put a link in the show notes and on the website. You're going to need water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning up. My favorite water is a spring and then a stream. And my least favorite is a lake, because lakes can collect the bad things that flush down into the lake, but it's really hard for them to get out. Rivers also collect all the runoff, so that's also one of my least popular choices, but with the proper water treatment, you can drink from any water source. If there's a lot of debris in it, just take your bandana and strain it before you treat it. I learned the most unpleasant way by getting Giardia how important it is to filter your water no matter how clean you think it looks. It is not pleasant. So unless it's coming straight out and I see the source of the spring and there's no livestock in the area, I treat my water. And even then, you could be at risk of a bear or a moose or something like that being uphill of wherever the water source is and contaminating your water source. So it's pretty much advised to treat your water no matter the source. I remember another story about water that on that same hike that I was talking about with Jane and Jerry. We were camping near a shelter on the Appalachian Trail. Beautiful overlook. It was a really nice spot. And we went over to the shelter. They have periodic shelters that people can stay in, these little lean-tos. And in them are these guidebooks that hikers can record. They've been there or make notes or whatever. And one hiker had written, "Evil water," all capital letters. And what he meant by that is here we have just trudged up this really steep mountain to get to this beautiful site. And the water, you had to trudge back down about almost a half a mile to get to the stream, to get your water source. So that was the evil part of it, because you thought you were done for the day and your water source was a grueling straight back down, straight back up with a lot of heavy water. Anyhow, and just as another aside, remember that you always want to camp at least 200 feet from a water source and well off the trail and not in any part of the wildlife's worn path. You can kind of see the paths that they make to their water source. So keep away from that too. You don't want to be disturbing the wildlife. So we found out what we can do. We found some good water. And so the next thing you got to look for is the terrain. You got to consider the terrain. So unless you're using a hammock where how level the site is isn't as critical, You want to find a level site because you don't want to feel like you're rolling down the hill while you're sleeping. It's very unnerving. Even a slight pitch doesn't look like much when you're standing up, but when you're lying down at night, you feel like you're going to roll down to the bottom of your tent by the end of the evening. And you also want to make sure you're not setting your tent down on the area where water can collect if it happens to rain that night. So now we found a good water source. We found a pretty level spot. Now, before you set up camp, the next important thing you need to do is look around the site that you've chosen and look for hazards. Like in my first example, the dead branches and trees, that could be fatal. So you want to look up above you for any large dead branches or trees that, should the wind pick up or the tree decides today's a good day to fall, could fall on you and possibly hurt you. We were really stupid to camp where we did because, like I said, we were in a stand of dead trees, probably by the lightning strike, and it would have taken nothing for any of those branches to fall down on top of us. Another good reason to set up camp before you get so tired that you make stupid choices like we did. So looking for hazards is not just looking above. Look around you. If you see piles of rock and debris, you could be in a flash flood hazard area. And site selection is critical if you're in a canyon and bad weather comes in quickly. You may not have time to get out. This is another good thing to check with the rangers beforehand. Particularly if there's streams. I was at one campsite and they said just make sure you're always at least 8 feet above the water level because they did get flash floods there. But if I stayed at least 8 feet higher, then I was fine. Not 8 feet away, 8 feet higher in elevation. Remember, 200 feet from the water. And if you're camping on a beach, you want to make sure you're well above the high tide watermark. And you can see that by, you'll see like seaweed and little debris makes like a little ridge line in the sand. That tells you the last high tide watermark. If the moon is rising, it's going to be higher than that. So you don't want to be that close to it anyway. And if you're camping in the coastal areas, make sure you have a tide chart. In the winter, and I don't cover a lot of winter things here, but just since it's part of this thing, you don't want to camp in any avalanche-prone areas or at any time of the year in any rock slide areas. In addition, you don't want to camp by that one lone tree that announces itself as the lightning rod. Okay, so we have found a nice, flat, safe area. Now we got to think about the weather. Number 4, the weather. So if the forecast and your visual assessment of the skies indicates that you're going to have a pleasant evening, it's nice to camp higher up in the mountains. You're going to have a better view. You're going to get to see the sun earlier, and you'll also have more wind, which means less bugs. And if it's a little chilly out, still early or late in the season, the cold air collects down the valleys, so you'll also be a little bit warmer. So we are rocking and rolling now. It looks like we're getting close to finding a great site. We've got great water, the terrain is good, we've found a hazard-free zone, we've found an appropriate place for the expected weather. So what's next? What do we think about next to see if this is an appropriate site for us? We've got to make sure it's the right size. Particularly if you're camping with others, you've got to find a site, and this was the problem that we were having, that Jane and Jerry were having, is that because we had 3 tents, there's lots of places for 1 tent, but it was few and far between to find a place that was large enough for the 3 tents. And if, let's say, you're group camping and you're going to be out for a few days, it can't just be to set up the tent itself. You're going to need a hanging out area. You're going to need a kitchen area. And if you brought things to play with, like a frisbee or a football, you want to have some room to throw that around too. So you want to make sure the space that you choose is large enough to do the activities that you set out for in the first place. All right, if you got lots of options there, now let's fine-tune this campsite a little bit. Are there any natural features that we can use to make ourselves more comfortable? These could be large boulders or some fallen trees that can make nice camp furniture that you don't have to carry around. I personally don't pack a camp chair, so I often like to find something I can sit on or lean against. And I carry a small piece of ripstop fabric. That's this waterproof fabric. It weighs nothing. You can buy it at like Joann Fabrics or something like that. Actually, I bought mine online. And so I keep this to sit on if I want to sit on a log or on the ground. So it keeps the chiggers and other things from biting me and also keeps my butt dry. So now I found a nice, flat, large place with some nice free camp furniture. And now I'm getting ready to set my tent down. What do I look at now? Now I'm going to try to face my tent door towards the morning sun. If you don't have your bearings, just use your compass to get a reading. And this is going to help you wake earlier, and it's just so much more pleasant to have the sun wake you up gently. My personal preference is a shady spot that gets the morning sun, but that has a sunny area nearby. And if you find that sunny place nearby, you can tie up a rope. I carry some parachute rope. across some trees and make a little clothesline. So with a little luck and a little breeze, I can dry out anything that may have gotten wet from the afternoon shower. I might also wash my delicates and have that all dried out by morning. The 8th consideration we want to do is if you come to an area that's obviously been camped on before, rather than harming other vegetation, you want to use existing sites. Now, obviously, you don't want to puncture the tent floor with rocks and sticks. So if you see areas that people have camped before, choose that first, and then gently brush away anything that might puncture the bottom of your tent. And then in the morning, just try to put it back the best you can the way that you found it. In the winter, you want to camp on top of the snow or on top of bare ground to minimize any harm to vegetation. And if you see a trail of animal tracks, don't put your tent there. That could be one of the animal's little freeways to get to and from its water or food sources. Animals are creatures of habit just like we are. Now let's talk about privacy. Number 9. If there's other campers nearby, you want to respect each other's privacy. If possible, you want to camp where you can't see or hear each other, and preferably where people on the trail can't see you either. And don't assume other campers want company. Many people head to the woods for solitude, so please respect that and don't take it personally if they just do a nod of the head or a quick hello, but they don't want to stop and chat. For more on wilderness etiquette, please look to episode number 10 of this podcast. There's a lot of helpful advice in there so that we're all happy campers. And finally, speaking of 10, number 10. You want to take advantage of the wind as organic pest control. A breeze will help you keep away from mosquitoes and other pests. Likewise, you want to avoid some damp areas or still water because those are breeding grounds. But if it's too windy, you're going to want to look for a natural windbreak, like large stable boulders or a block of trees. If you're lucky enough to check the box on all 10 of these suggestions, you will have found the perfect campsite. So to recap what we want to consider, number 1, water availability and source. 2, the terrain. You want to find a level spot. 3, find a hazard-free zone. 4, you want to find a site suitable for the expected weather. 5, you want to find a site with the proper size for your party. 6, look for bonus amenities like stones or stump chairs and tables. 7, look for the perfect mix of sun and shade. 8, find one that minimizes a negative impact on the land and the wildlife. 9, is private. And 10, is pest-free. I hope you'll find these helpful. They will be included in the monthly newsletter, which I hope you've signed up for. And you can always get on that list by going to the website and signing up there or emailing me at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I always encourage your feedback and any suggestions for the show or things you'd like to see me cover. Remember that every Thursday I release an episode alternating between this, the Adventure Travel Show podcast, and the Active Travel Adventures podcast. This one you learn the how-tos. Active Travel Adventures, you learn the destinations. Next up on the Active Travel Adventures podcast next week, I have a super fun episode on Baja, Mexico and the Day of the Dead celebration. And then coming up the following week on this show, we'll have tips for safely crossing a river, which if you don't know, is the greatest risk and hazard that a hiker faces. I appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!